Hi, I'm Shannon Simons, and I am the author of Safe House. And I've been reading it a couple chapters at a time on my channel so that you can hear Safe House and so that we can talk a little bit about what inspired the book. I will read the chapter, and I apologize. We're up in the forest Tillamook Head Trail in Oregon. This is where part of the book takes place, and I thought it would be fun to take you to where some of the story takes place. This is actually a trail, so it's not as heavily wooded. I would go deeper in the woods, but my kids did search and rescue up here, and I know how easily it is to get lost. So we're going to do Chapter 5, Secrets. And in Chapter 5, you get to meet a new character. You get to meet Kelly, and then we go back to the story of Emily. The other chapters are on my channel. So Kelly lay in bed with her eyes closed, sensing everything around her. Her husband's breathing was regular. The house was dark and still. Her mind was churning, unwilling and unable to stop thinking, wondering, worrying. Slowly she opened her eyes and let them adjust to the dark room. Clean and white sheets in the spotless bedroom smelled freshly laundered. Felt crisp and were noisy from any movement. Luckily, her husband wasn't touching her anywhere. Slowly she tried to slide out of her side of the bed and from in between the rustling sheets. Every sound seemed to be magnified. Moving smoothly, her feet around the cold hardwood floor, her light cotton nightgown seemed to make more noise than usual. Less starch, she thought. Skipping the third floorboard from the bed, a squeaker, she softly made her way down the hall to the bathroom. The door was ajar. Like a ghost, she slid around it. He had removed the knob. At first, the empty hole had been a slap in the face, but now it was just a fact of life. Carefully, she lifted the toilet lid like she was going to use it in case he was listening. Sometimes she was sure he had superhuman senses. Both knees popped as she knelt by the clawfoot tub. The moon shone through the stained glass window, and the spotless brass fixtures reflected her tired eyes. Momentarily, she found herself scanning the fixtures for fingerprints. Then she shook it off and began her silent prayer. God, she prayed, silently. Everything is so hard. Thank you for my beautiful Hazel and little Sam, but I am so worried. Please, God, save us, she begged, and her desperation poured out. She sensed him before she heard him or saw him. He was there on the other side of the door, standing silently, angrily in the dark. Peeking out one eye, she saw his clenched hand in the light of the moonbeam, shining through the hole in the door. Her heart began pounding. Her mind was racing. What excuse? As she began to get up, he violently slammed the door open with his fist, smashing her ear. The pain burst like white-hot light in the dark. When the loud, hollow sound of the wooden door hitting her broke through the quiet of the night, she bent over, clutching her ear, trying not to show him how bad it hurt. She checked for blood. I'm sorry, Sam. I'm sorry. I just had to go to the bathroom, she whispered desperately, holding her hands up protectively in front of her face. On your knees? Just like my pious mother? Praying? It was no use. She was a lousy liar. I was praying for Hazel. She's too thin. It scares me, Sam. I'm sorry. I was thin. She's my kid. Shuffling backwards, she tried to move around him toward the door. I'm sorry, Sam. He clenched his fists. In the dark, his eyes were two empty holes. His face was so dark. She wanted to turn the light on. Don't wake the kids, Sam. Suddenly, he was in her face, spit blowing in her eyes. Afraid it would anger him, she didn't dare move. Don't you love me? He asked, and then without waiting for an answer said, There is no God. Are you trying to leave me? You're going to leave me, aren't you? No, Sam. I love you. Forcing herself to reach out, she touched his face. Taking her in his arms, he collapsed against her. Was he crying? He was so injured, so abused. Anguish, she felt so sorry for him. It's my fault, she thought. Poor Sam. After all, she knew she had been forced to pray for hours as a child. She felt thoughtless and selfish. Come to bed, Sam, she whispered, taking his hand and gently leading him to their room. And then we go back to the hospital. Grace held Emily's hand while the doctors stitched her forehead together. The fine line creating a permanent reminder of the night Emily's fingers dug into Grace's flesh as silent tears cut paths through her bloody face. Between stitches and a trip to get an x-ray, Grace heard more of Emily's story. Emily had been married for a short time to someone else before Burke. Compared to her first husband, who is now in prison, She believed Burke was a great guy. When Emily met Burke, she was still married to her first husband, and her daughter, Amber, was small. Even though he had rescued her, he didn't trust her. She didn't blame him because she had cheated on her first husband with Burke. Emily's parents had fought all the time too, so this was just how life was. Burke took good care of them. They had a great big house. After all, he wasn't a monster all the time. Emily was sure Grace couldn't possibly understand. "You don't know," Emily said. "Maybe I do," is all that Grace offered. Emily looked at Grace and studied her face. Then her eyebrows raised, and she had that look. They exchanged the look of understanding and recognition. "I've been single for 5 years," Grace offered. "Oh," Emily said knowingly. Grace knew that Emily was busy making assumptions, and she let her. Grace's marriage was the experience that drove her to want to change the world and to go out all hours of the night. Her ex-husband was truly evil, controlling, manipulative, abusive, and luckily, history. It was easy to leave her ex when she saw his angry storm head in the children's direction. It was okay to hurt her, but not her children. The first time she recognized his darkness was she was out the door. Her ex was capable of hurting children and then wanting to love her like nothing had happened. Over time, her feelings went from anger and hurt to pity. Eventually, she would pray for him. But she was the exception, and not everything was black and white, as Grace's marriage had been. Surprised that her thoughts about the past were still so charged with pain and shame, she still felt lucky to be alive. Earth to Grace, she thought, come back to now. "You seem so normal," Emily said, interrupting her thoughts. "Way too normal, messy, loud, and definite proof that happily ever after comes with stained laundry and big bills." Laughing, Grace was glad to leave the memory of her ex in the past, happy to keep him as far away from her as possible. Emily smiled warmly at Grace, and they continued talking, finally sharing truths. I've heard officers, I've heard family members, I've heard people say, they're just going to separate and then they'll go right on to be with another person that's abusive. Well, statistically, that's not true. At one point in time, they thought it was 11% of survivors went on to be with somebody else that was abusive. And so I did a little digging in my county, and I did not find that to be the case. Instead, I found that abusers go on to have multiple victims. A lot of people, once they leave an abusive relationship, go on to be happy. And we don't want to discourage people or make them feel like there's no hope or that there's something wrong with them, and that's why this has happened to them. They're normal. Normal people get caught in really difficult circumstances. Strong women, strong men, normal men, all of us, all genders, all ethnicities, we all have those moments. So that is pretty much all I have to say about that. You'll get to see a little more of Kelly. And as you can see, she loves Sam. And Sam is needy. And, that sentence, "he's not a monster all the time," is very true. I think survivors can be compassionate and caring and really worry about abusers sometimes. Sadly, that doesn't keep them alive. So next week, chapter 6.